As of the day I'm uploading this video, it has been exactly 15 years since the original release of speculative science ATV, Steins Gate. While the creators are in the midst of their own anniversary plans, to commemorate the occasion myself, I wanted to take a look back at the series and also reflect a bit on my own experiences with it, having been a fan for over 9.5 years now. For those of you who aren't familiar with Steins Gate, it is the second mainline entry in and the most popular part of Mages' and Chiyomaru Studios' science adventure series, otherwise known as Sci-ADV. The Sci-ADV franchise is a long-running series of heavily interconnected sci-fi visual novels. On the narrative end, while each part has its own unique cast, setting, and somewhat self-contained plot, they all build upon their predecessors to make an overarching storyline with recurring plot lines, mechanics, and characters. And on the thematic end, the entire series revolves around the ideas of free will versus determinism, as well as addressing the question, is the scenery your eyes perceive truly real? Steins Gate in particular places heavier emphasis on the former. The Steins Gate visual novel was originally released on October 15, 2009, less than a year after the first mainline entry, Chaos at Noah. Taking place in the summer of 2010, a little while after the events of Chaos at Noah, Steins Gate follows self-proclaimed mad scientist Okabe Rintaro, also known as Hoin Kyoma, who leads a group of university and high school students in what he calls the Future Gadget Lab. There, they build a variety of different and often seemingly useless inventions, including a microwave hooked up to a cell phone. One day, they accidentally discover the means of sending text messages back to the past through that very microwave. And as Okabe and the Future Gadget Lab continue experimenting with time travel, they find themselves caught up in a conspiracy surrounding the particle physics research organization, CERN. Okabe soon realizes that with their seemingly innocent experimentation, they may have crossed the point of no return. As you may have been able to tell from its general synopsis, the story takes heavy inspiration from quite a number of pre-existing time travel stories, such as Back to the Future, Groundhog Day, and Thrice Upon a Time. It also takes heavy inspiration from a number of pre-existing visual novels, like Yuno, the Infinity series, and I.O. So if you're a fan of their themes, you might enjoy Steins Gate as well. To this day, Steins Gate remains one of the best received and most popular visual novels of all time, in large part due to its massively successful and extremely well-directed anime adaptation from 2011, which I have personally watched a good 7 or 8 times at this point. The Steins Gate anime adaptation by Studio White Fox received a whopping 24 episodes, despite being one of the shortest entries in the series, allowing for adequate time to tell the story properly, and for many more eyes to see the story's value. And as a result of its popularity, Steins Gate has hundreds upon hundreds of hours worth of content across so many different forms of media. Most of my personal enjoyment of the Steins Gate subseries has come from its expansive side material, with how interesting they've been from a characterization, series lore, and thematic standpoint. It's pretty similar to how I think the main highlight of Star Wars is absolutely not the 9 main films, but rather the wider world and its spin-offs. And while I could rave on and on about how much I love Brownian Motion of Love and Hate, or Arclight of the Pointed Infinity, or Babel of the Grieved Maze, I wanted to center in on the original story that started it all, and see how well it's aged 15 years later. Just a heads up before continuing further, the rest of the video will contain Steins Gate subseries spoilers. But with that in mind, let's dive right in. There's so much to love about the original game. From the mesmerizing artwork by Huke, to the incredible soundtrack by Takeshi Abo, to the immaculate story by Naotaka Hayashi. Many, including myself, also love the mechanics and the way time travel is able to work in Steins Gate. It really opens up an entire sandbox for theory crafting and fan discussion, especially with full Sci-ADV series context. But one aspect of Steins Gate that I absolutely adore is the way the story locks you into Okabe's perspective from beginning to end. You truly feel his fear, dread, and anxiety as the story unfolds, making him such a compelling protagonist, even if he doesn't have a properly defined character arc in the original story. And when shit hits the fan at the end of chapter 5, it gets painful to see him repeatedly go through all this agonizing pain and torture. My overall favorite parts of the story would probably be chapters 6, 9, 10, and 11. Chapter 9 in particular has a very special place in my heart, with Braun easily being one of my favorite characters from the story. With the context of Brownian motion, this chapter hits even harder. And even in a lot of the Steins Gate after stories like Holy Day of the Calamitous Birth, you can really see the trauma that the events of chapter 9 had inflicted upon Okabe, even well after reaching the Steins Gate world line. But even some of the earlier parts of the game are quite enjoyable, especially with the context of Chaos at Noah. And replaying the game after going through the entire series up to Anonymous Code just highlights so many lines where you can tell that they had this whole series planned out from the start. And I can't help but grin every time I come across those moments of foreshadowing in Steins Gate. It's like you find something new every time you revisit it. And that's one of the things that makes this such a special story, even 15 years later. That being said, as much as I love Steins Gate, I can't say the entirety of the original story has aged well. Luca's character, of course, is one big thing that comes to practically everybody's mind. The game treats him as an absolute joke, and hides crucial parts of his character behind optional texts. But another aspect of the story that I think has aged a little poorly is the root system. While the in-game text messages can be fun, they're super annoying when it comes to the true ending flags. You straight up just can't get to the true ending without a guide. And while requiring a guide may be an issue with all but one SciTV entry, I think the root system problem is at its worst in Robotics Notes and Steins Gate. With regards to the actual quality of the roots themselves, with the exception of the Suzuha root and the true ending, Steins Gate's roots are otherwise not that good. In the grand scheme of things, they contribute remarkably little to the series, making them a huge step down from how the roots massively factored into the overarching narrative of Chaos at Noah. In Noah, a few of the character roots practically flipped the entire SciTV franchise over on its head, but in Steins Gate, the side roots are basically just glorified bad endings and say remarkably little of substance. And even then, they contribute less to the overarching story than what a lot of Anonymous Code's bad endings do. The Ferris route is nice in that it introduces the Omega Attractor field, which is conceptually quite interesting at least, but otherwise, Steins Gate's roots are just Okabe giving up and getting together with a different girl. You could outright remove them from the game and lose very little of value. I didn't particularly mind when I was 14, since those types of roots are a staple of a lot of games in this genre. But over the years, the game's root structure and the roots themselves have become a lot more jarring to me, especially as I've gone deeper and deeper into SciTV. Entries like Robotics Notes, Occultic 9, and Anonymous Code have a more even number of male and female characters in their respective casts, and thus don't come off feeling like they're akin to harem stories where you just date a different girl with each ending. Even the Chaos games, which also have significantly more female characters than male characters, are designed that way for very intentional and thematically meaningful reasons, with the way they serve as criticisms of internet culture. But for Steins Gate, I find there's no meaningful reason for it having a harem-like design other than it appealing to the wider Galgate audience. Okabe being an absolute Giga Chad chick magnet doesn't help its case either. But by and large, even with those issues, the original Steins Gate visual novel is still pretty amazing 15 years later. An 8 out of 10 for me. So moving on from my main story review, I want to dive into my personal reflection segment. Like a lot of people, I started my journey with Steins Gate and SciTV with the Steins Gate anime. I'd grown up watching anime ever since I was 4 years old. It's a very easily accessible medium that appeals to people of all ages, from children to the elderly. And my friends had been recommending Steins Gate to me ever since I was in 5th grade, back in the fall of 2012, as any elementary and middle school otaku would be doing back in the early 2010s. But for whatever reason, I only got around to watching Steins Gate back in March of 2015, when I was in 7th grade. In those days, most of what I watched were battle shonens and weekly one-cour seasonal series, so Steins Gate was a bit different from what I'd usually watch, and I initially started it on a complete whim. I was admittedly a little bit bored at first, having not felt particularly hooked by the first 2 episodes, and ended up stalling it for a week or so. But as a 7th grader with nothing better to do, I got back to it and continued onwards further through the anime, not knowing what to expect. But by the halfway mark, I was hooked. I binged the second half of the anime in no time at all, and it quickly became one of my favorite stories ever. Only days after I finished, they announced Steins Gate Zero, and I was more excited than ever before. As I was waiting for Steins Gate Zero to release, the following year, I went through the original Steins Gate visual novel, as well as YouTube fan translations of Linear Bounded Phonogram and My Darling's Embrace. Then in the fall of 2016, I finally got to play the official English release of Steins Gate Zero, and I loved it. I still remember how cathartic it felt to finish the promised Rinashimento and Vega and Altair after everything Okabe had been through. But reading the Zero visual novel made the wait for the Steins Gate Zero anime feel agonizingly long, and during the wait, I went through a lot of Steins Gate drama CDs and even took a trip to Akihabara and the Radio Kaikan building myself. But eventually came the spring of 2018, when we finally got the Steins Gate Zero anime. So of course, being the massive Steins Gate fan that I was, I eagerly kept up with it week to week until the very final episode, which left me with the most satisfying post-credits scene from anything I've ever seen. I still remember screaming in joy, finally getting answers to questions left all the way back from the release of Arclight. Keeping up with the anime week to week was such a phenomenal experience, and in the aftermath, I wanted more. And so I came to find out about something called Robotics Notes Dash. I recognized the semicolon name scheme convention, as well as the name Dash from Linear Bounded Phonogram, which piqued my curiosity. It was then that I came to know that Steins Gate was actually part of a larger series. And the rest is history. I've been a die-hard SciADV fan ever since, and for me, it all started with Steins Gate. So it has a special place in my heart to this day. Once again, happy 15th anniversary to Steins Gate. Here's to 15 years more. To everyone watching, thank you.
そうか。それがシュタインズゲートの選択か。L、プサイ、コングルフ。